Hey Northway, happy Father's Day to all of our dads across all of our campuses. I'm really excited to be with everyone this weekend. This is a rare treat for me. If you were with us on Mother's Day, you heard Pastor Scott say that for Mother's Day and for Father's Day over the past few years or so, we've always tried to buy a little gift for our moms and our dads that we can give you on the way out the door. And this year we decided to do something a little bit different. We took all of those funds and we donated them to the Light of Life Rescue Mission. On Mother's Day, we gave it to the women's. Yeah, absolutely. Celebrate that. That's awesome. On Mother's Day, we gave all those funds to the women and children's programs they have down there. And then for Father's Day, they asked us specifically to buy some ties for the guys to go out on job interviews and to interview for apartments as well. Apartments. And so we put all those together just this past week. One of our small groups got together and put together those gifts for them. So thank you. Happy Father's Day. Thank you for letting us make an impact here in our city. Yeah. Like I said, it's a rare treat for me to get to be in front of all of our campuses this weekend. And so whether you're in Wexford or in Oakland, Swickley Valley, East End, or the greatest campus ever, Dormont, welcome. We're so glad that you're here. We're glad that you're here this weekend. And I'm really excited that next year we get to add another name onto that list, right? When Beaver Valley comes, super excited about the Beaver Valley launch coming up early next year. And I'll tell you, I don't know if you know this or not, but Beaver Valley is actually, it's going to be a great campus. It's going to be built out in what used to be a Kmart up in that area. And I tried really hard to get them to name it Northway Kmart because I thought that was really funny. I thought the Northway Kmart would be a really creative idea, but nobody around here has a sense of humor. So it's going to be called Northway Beaver Valley. Name it whatever you want. That's fine. It's fine by me. None of the signs have been made, so maybe we can still convince them to name it Northway Kmart. I'm not really sure. But I'm really excited for Pastor Chris White and his team in this season, because I remember this season. Just 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, we launched the Dormont campus. And this season of launching a campus, it's this amazing mixture of working really hard at something and praying really hard, and then you get to watch God open these doors that you would have never imagined Him being able to open. It's this exciting time where the core team comes together, the staff comes together, and I'm really excited for what they're getting to experience right now. But I'll tell you this, that sometimes there are setbacks to launching a campus. We experienced one of those setbacks almost right off the bat. About a month after we launched our campus, we came in one morning to find water pouring down through all 3 floors of our building. Water was coming out the light fixtures in our hallway. The plaster in the sanctuary was peeling off the walls. The carpet was saturated. The new ceiling that we had just put in a week earlier in our lobby was collapsed down onto the floor. What we had learned was that night a storm had blown through Dormont and our building was struck by lightning. One of the 8-foot-tall spires on top of our bell tower was struck by lightning. Here's a couple shots before and after. That's before. You can see all 4 beautiful spires up there. This is what they look like a little closer. That's what it looked like after it got hit by lightning. It exploded into basketball-sized chunks of stone that fell onto the flat roof and flushed thousands of gallons of water into our building. And that's what we found on Sunday morning when we came in to start our services. And I'm not going to lie to you, I cried a little bit because we had just worked so hard on this campus and literally our work was being flushed away, right? And so it's not always an easy season to go through because sometimes you have some setbacks. And as painful as that experience was for us to go through, we made it through it. Our maintenance and facilities team here at Northway, who always do such a great job of keeping our campuses looking their best, they dove right in. They began to clean things up. They began to help problem solve all of these issues we were having with the building. And one of those problems that we had, what do we do with that burnt spire that's just sitting up there way above the street that at any time could just fall over and hurt someone? And so we just decided to chop it off, right? We just decided to chop it off, and this is what our building looks like now. That's not what our building looks like. There you go, right? We just decided to chop the thing off, and the reason why is because we figured out that it's going to cost way too much money to rebuild this just decoration up there. And so now our building has this scar on it, right? It has this scar just sitting up there, and I kind of like that. Even as painful as that experience was, all these years later, I love that our building has a scar because I think that scars come with stories, right? And that's a really fun story for us to tell now. It wasn't fun that morning, but that's what scars do. They come with stories. right? And I'm sure I'm not the only one in the room that has some of those stories. I've got this scar on the back of my head from when I was in elementary school and I cracked my head on the playground and it bust open. I still have that scar back there. I've got a scar on my arm where my cousin thought it was a good idea to throw a rusty dart at my face, and as I blocked it, it went in my arm. I still have that scar today. That same cousin, he threw a G.I. Joe airplane at my face. I don't know what it was about that guy throwing things at my face. He was actually kind of a jerk now that I think about it. But scars come with stories, right? And I'm sure you have some too. Maybe you have some scars that came from an accident. It was unexpected. Maybe you even have scars from a surgery that saved your life. But scars come with stories, don't they? They come with stories. And they don't just come with stories, they come with opportunity, as we're going to see today. And so if you look in the scriptures, it clearly shows us that our scars can have tremendous power. But for some of us, I bet some of our scars are not scars that we can point to, right? They're not scars that have an easy story to tell or even a funny story to tell. Maybe some of our scars come with names like rejection or addiction, maybe failure, maybe even abuse. And those kind of scars, they come with stories that are not easy to tell. They're just not easy to tell. These are the kind of scars that cut us so deep, they cut into our soul. And they don't only cut into our soul, they change who we are. They change who we are. It's a change in life that is forced upon us. A change that we don't want, right? And whether or not they're our fault or not, now they're our responsibility, and now they're part of our story. So when change is forced into our lives in a way that leaves us wounded, that leaves us scars, what do we do? Right? Isn't that the question that we always ask? What do we do? What do I do? What do I do to get me away from that pain, to get me away from those scars that have hurt me so badly? But I would say that if we look into scriptures, the way that God has designed us to be is that there would be a better question for us to ask, a more courageous question for us to ask. And that would not be, what do I do? It would be, who am I supposed to be? Who am I supposed to be when the unwanted changes of life enter in and begin to scar me deeply? Who am I supposed to be? You know, in the Bible, there's only one place and one person that Jesus directly addresses as daughter. And we took a look at her story on Mother's Day. And there's only one person and one place in the Bible that Jesus directly addresses someone as son. And we're going to look at his story a little bit today. But on Mother's Day, we met a woman, and she enters into the story identified only by her scars. Right? We know her as the hemorrhaging woman. That's what we still call her today. But even though she enters into that story identified by her ailments, identified by what's wrong with her, by the end of the story, she walks away knowing that she is a daughter of the King. Today we're going to look at this man. His story is close to hers as well. Both of these stories sit inside of the chapter 9 in Matthew. And I think Matthew put them together for a very specific reason that we'll get to here in a second. But here's just the beginning of his story. He enters in the very same way that she does. He enters in identified only by his scars, only by what's wrong with him, right? We call him the paralytic man, the guy with 4 friends. And this is how his story starts. It says, getting into a boat, Jesus crossed over the sea and came to his own city. And they brought to him a paralytic lying on a bed. And seeing their faith, Jesus said to the paralytic, take courage, son. Your sins are forgiven. Now, I'm going to pause it right there because I told you that I think that Matthew put these stories together for a reason. Matthew, out of all of the eyewitnesses, out of all of the gospel writers that we find in the New Testament, he was a master of connecting the Old Testament into the way he told a story. More than any other gospel author, he uses the Old Testament. And so I think that he's purposely putting these two stories together for a reason. I think he's putting these two stories together because it points back to something in the Old Testament. It points back to the original story, right? I think this is a story that we probably all know at least a little bit. The original story, the first few pages into the Bible. And we see that God is on a creative streak, right? He's creating all kinds of things. And at the peak of his creation, he creates Adam and Eve. And he brings them together. And as he brings them together, he pronounces two things over them. If you'll remember this, he pronounces two things over them. First, he says that you are made in my image. So he gives them an identity. He gives them an identity. You are made in my image, which means that you are a reflection of who I am. And second, he gives them a purpose. He says, I want you to go out into all of creation, the creation that I have made for you, and I want you to multiply it. I want you to multiply creation. I want you to multiply humanity. So he gives them an identity and he gives them a purpose. And they set off in that story with their identity and purpose to make an impact on the world. But we know what happens, right? We know this story. Just one turn of the page later, and they've messed it all up. They've traded their identity and they've traded their purpose for disobedience. They did the one thing that God asked them to not do. And God told them that there would be consequences of their actions. And so in Genesis 3, he outlines their consequences. This is what it says. He says, first to Eve, he says, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children, and your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. And so simply put, he just says that multiplying now is going to be painful. Your purpose in life is going to come with some scars. And so maybe for some, that could be the actual pain of giving birth physically to a child. Maybe for some, it could be the pain of knowing that you can never have a child. Maybe it's the pain of losing a child. The point is that multiplying is now painful. And for Adam, he gives a pronouncement as well. He says, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. And you shall eat of the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread until you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. And so what he tells Adam in this moment is that multiplying is going to come with pain. The ground that I gave you to grow and to feed and provide for your family, now it's going to come with thorns and thistles. It's going to be tough work. By the sweat of your brow, you're going to sweat out a living to try to multiply this and provide it to your family. So back to Matthew 9. Do you see them in there? Do you see this woman and this man in that Genesis passage? Because of her hemorrhage, she can't have children. Because of his paralysis, he can't work. They're not a reflection of who God created them to be. They're a reflection of Adam and Eve and their decision and their disobedience. Just like Adam and Eve, they are buried under the scars of life, and they're carrying that into these stories. They are buried under those scars of life. And I don't think their stories are unique. You know, I think each of us every day have to wake up and make that decision, right? When we go to school, when we go to work, when we sit around the table with our family, when we grab coffee with a friend, we have to decide, what am I going to be a reflection of into this world? Am I going to be a reflection of God, the image of God like he created me to be, or am I going to be a reflection of the scars of life? Let's jump back into his story in Matthew 9. It says, they brought to him a paralytic lying on a bed, and then seeing their faith, Jesus said to the paralytic, take courage, son. Your sins are forgiven. And some of the scribes said to themselves, this fellow blasphemes. And Jesus, knowing in their hearts, he said, why are you thinking evil in your hearts? Which is easier to say, your sins are forgiven, or to say, get up and walk? But so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, he said to the paralytic, get up, pick up your bed, and go home. And he got up and he went home. But when the crowd saw this, they were awestruck and they glorified God who had given such authority to men. So that phrase, take courage, right before he says son, that phrase, take courage, it simply means to be aware, to be bold. And it only occurs a few times in the New Testament. And every time it occurs, right before this happens, there's a moment of fear. Probably the greatest example is when Jesus comes walking on the water to his disciples, right? And they look out and they see him and they think that he is a ghost. And they are terrified. They are scared of what's happening right now. And the first thing that Jesus calls out to them is take courage. It's me. Be aware of what's happening right now. And so what is it about this man right here in Matthew 9 that has Jesus look down and say, take courage? What is the fear that is in this man? Well, I think the thing is that he's buried under those thorns and thistles, right? He's buried under the scars of life. Everybody just knows him as the paralyzed man. We never see his name. And he's buried under the fear and the shame that comes with his position. Just like Adam and just like Eve, he's buried under those scars. So let me ask you this. Is that you? Does that sound like your story? Are you sitting here today so buried under the scars that life has dealt to you? The unwanted changes that have been forced into your life? Are you so buried underneath them that you feel as though that those wounds are what define you? That when you walk into a room that's all someone sees? You might think to yourself, I'm not a daughter, right? I'm not a son. No one would want me with the scars that I have. No one would want me, especially not God. You know, the late singer Rich Mullins, he really struggled with this idea that God would even want him because of his past. And he wrote in a book years ago this. He said, some of us are so afraid that God is not going to look at us. So we're out there doing all sorts of things to get God to take notice. But folks, God notices you. In fact, he can't take his eyes off of you. However badly you think of yourself, God is crazy about you. God is in love with you. Some of us even fear that someday we'll do something so bad that he won't take notice anymore. Well, let me tell you, God loves us completely. And he knew us at our worst before he ever began to love us at all. And in the love of God, there are no degrees. There is only love. I think that's what this man in Matthew 9 and this woman in Matthew 9 discovered the moment that Jesus said daughter and the moment that he said son. He reminded them of their identity with that one simple phrase, take courage, son. He says, I want to remind you who you are. I want to remind you what you were created to be. I want to remind you of the purpose for which you exist. Be aware, your scars are a part of who you are, but they are not your full story. You are a son of the King, and you were meant to multiply his glory over all of creation. So when you become a father to the fatherless, you multiply his glory in creation. When you stand up for the loveless in life, you multiply his glory in creation. When you sacrifice who you are for others, sacrifice your time and your energy and your resources, when you do that for others to love them and care for them, you're multiplying his glory. In other words, he says, like father, like son. Right? To follow in the example of Jesus is to live out the full image of God, of who we were created to be. That's what it means to be in his image. That was our original identity and our original purpose. But often we forget that when we look in the mirror in the morning and we only see the scars. Now here's the thing, scars come with stories, right? But I think that those stories come with opportunity. I think they come with opportunity. So scars come with stories, but stories come with opportunity. You know, when I first became a Christian in college, one of the things that captured me so much was this idea of God as a father. Because one of the biggest scars that I carry in life is my relationship with my dad. And I'm sure I'm not alone. So I wanted to tell a little bit of my story. My dad, he was kind of a rough guy. He was a coal miner. He worked way too much. He drank way too much. We lived on a farm, so even when he would come home from work, he would go right back out to work in the barns and the fields. And I really don't have a whole lot of memories of my parents being together. The only memories that I really have are loud and violent. But all that changed when he left. And I was 7 years old when he left. And I'll say this, that there is no bigger hero in a little boy's life than his dad. And so, as chaotic as home was, it crushed me when he left. I couldn't understand why he would leave us. And I'll tell you this, even 30 plus years later, I still don't understand it. It's something I still struggle with. It's still a scar that's left on me. And he left when I was 7, but for the next 8 years, I continued to try to pursue him and build a relationship with him because I just wanted to be with my dad. It was kind of difficult because he kept working a lot. He hopped around a lot. He kept getting married and divorced in different places. And it was difficult to nail him down. But every once in a while, I'd be able to give him a phone call or even take a visit to his place on the weekends. But every interaction that we had was just kind of cold. And so for those 8 years, I just pursued him like crazy, trying to build a relationship with him. And then when I turned 15, I had heard that he had gotten a divorce again, and he moved again. And this time he moved in with my grandfather, about an hour and a half away from where I was living. And so I got this bright idea that I was just going to ask him a big question. Can I move in with you? I thought, I'm 15 years old now. I need to know my dad, right? And to my surprise, he said, yes, I can move in. And so I packed up all of my stuff. I left my school. I left my friends behind. And I went and I moved in with my dad. And shortly after that, he got married again and he left. Do you know what that does to a kid? When their dad doesn't think they're worth sticking around for? Scars, right? It's my biggest one. I struggle with it all the time. But in those teenage years, I began to realize who my dad really was. The shine wore off. That hero that I had placed up on the pedestal became real to me. And I realized he didn't know how to be a dad. He didn't know how to be a husband. That he was struggling through life too. And our conversations were more arguments than they were anything else. In my college years and into adulthood, our distance got even greater because, I lived out of town and it was kind of harder to connect with him. But I would still call, I would still send cards. And I would make the 5-hour drive to go visit him. And I remember this one visit that I had with him. We were sitting in his kitchen and we had nothing to talk about. We're sitting there, father and son, and we were complete strangers. We had nothing to talk about. And I remember driving home that day after visiting him and thinking, I've pursued him my whole life. And I would just like to see a little bit of this come my way. And so on that drive home, I made the decision out of this question. I said, if I didn't pursue him, if I stopped calling, if I stopped sending cards, if I stopped writing or popping in to visit, how long would it take him to come my way? That was 15 years ago. I haven't heard from him. And I'll confess to you that's my biggest scar. That's what I carry through life. And it's hard to tell that story, even in abbreviated version. It's very hard to tell that story. But I think it's important to tell it. I think it's important to keep pushing forward because I think that scars come with stories, right? But those stories, they come with opportunity. And this is something that I learned really early on when I became a follower of Jesus. See, in college, my life was just so upside down because of my dad that the moment that I heard that there was a father who loved me and promised to never leave me, I couldn't say yes fast enough. I couldn't say yes fast enough to that offer, to think that I never had to wake up again and wonder if my dad was there. He said he would never leave me. And so I dove right in. But I learned too that just acknowledging my scars was not going to be enough. I had to do something with them or they would continue to bury me. And so not too long after I became a follower of Christ, I began to volunteer at my local student ministry in my local church with student ministry. And the student ministry director put me in a room with 7 middle school boys. And I hated it. It was terrible. Middle school boys, oh my gosh. I used to call it full contact Bible study because they seriously physically beat me up. And there was very little Bible study. I hated it. But you know what I learned? As I got to know these guys, these 7 guys who were the terrors of my life, most of them were growing up in homes without dads. And all of a sudden, my scars had a purpose. I got these guys. I understood what they were coming from, and I understood what they were going through, and no other youth leader on our team could reach them like I could. And the turning point in our relationship was when I had the opportunity to sit down with them and share my story, to show them my scars. They still beat me up a lot, which wasn't cool for a 21-year-old to get beat up by middle schoolers. It was like weird flashbacks. But that was a turning point when I realized that my scars actually had some power and it could reach these kids unlike anything else could. I truly believe that scars come with stories and stories come with an opportunity. My scars had a purpose. You see, our scars, they don't define who we are, but they can open up doors of opportunity for others. And not only help them through situations that they're dealing with, but to help them believe, to help them have a deeper faith. I truly believe that. See, Jesus shows us that we can use our scars and they have the ability to help others believe. You know, there was this moment after his resurrection where Jesus appeared to his disciples, to a large group of them. For some reason, Thomas wasn't there. He was off doing something else. And when Thomas came back, all of his friends said, "Hey, you're not going to believe this. Jesus is back. He is back from the dead." Thomas wouldn't believe. This is what he says. He says, Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, he was not with them when Jesus came. And so the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." Listen to that strong language. He says, I will never believe. I will never believe what you just told me. I will never believe that someone can die and come back from the dead. Never. But this is what happens. It says 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and this time Thomas was with them. And although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them, and he said, "Peace be with you." And then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." And Thomas says, "My Lord, my God." So he went from saying, "I will never believe," to falling down in front of Jesus and saying, "You are God." What changed? What happened? He saw his scars. Isn't that interesting? He saw his scars. And what's interesting is Jesus, even after the resurrection, he still had them. Thomas saw his scars, and that's what caused him to believe. As tough as this is to swallow, folks, I believe this is why God allows us to go through the unwanted changes of life. I really do. I think it's easy to believe in him when everything is perfect, right? When your job is going well, when your health is going well, when your marriage is amazing, but the moment that unwanted change begins to creep into those areas and cause scars, then that's the kind of faith that takes courage. That's the kind of faith that people are going to look at you and they're going to say, how in the world can you go through something like that and still believe? And it's in that moment that you can say, let me tell you a little bit about my story. Let me tell you a little bit about my scars. Bring them in close and let them see. Because I think that scars come with stories, right? But stories come with opportunities. That's an opportunity to bring them in and to help them believe. Folks, I know the unwanted changes of life, when they come in, our first reaction is to say, what do I do? But I really think the better question, the more courageous question, is who am I supposed to be? Right? Because this woman, she may have entered into the story as the hemorrhaging woman, but she left the story knowing that she is a daughter of the king. And this man walked into his story as the paralyzed man, the paralytic. But when he left, he knew that he was a son of the king. He was wanted. He was loved. So as I close our time together, I want to throw some questions your way. In order for us to be who God created us to be, to live out our true identity, to live out our true purpose in life, I think there are some things that we need to courageously take out of our life, right? We need to step up and to be able to take out some of the lies that have been poured into our life. The lies that tell us that we're nothing more than a collection of shortcomings and failures and faults. We need to take those out because there's no room for those kinds of things in the life of a son or a daughter of the king. You've got to make room for something else. Where have you traded your identity? Where have you traded your purpose for disobedience? That's something that's got to come out. The second question is this: what are you willing to courageously take in? You see, you got to take that stuff out first in order to make room for what you're about to take in. Ladies, you are a daughter of the king. Fellas, you're a son of the king. You have no room in your life for the words worthless, shameful. You've got no room in your life for it. You are a daughter of the king. You are a son of the king. Take that in. Take in your true identity. And when change comes your way, unwanted change is forced into your life, you can rest in the fact that your Father never changes. He says, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. So you can take all of your hopes and all that you are and you can place them into his hands and rest because you have a Father that loves you. And once you've done that, there's your identity. You're restored. You know who you are. Then you got to go after your purpose. You got to courageously take on some things. And I know it's not easy to share your scars. It's not easy. But you can't go through life just swallowing them or trying to distance yourself from them. Because you can either use them or they will swallow you. Jesus showed us that our scars have a purpose. If we use them, they can help others believe. And that's how we can multiply his kingdom here on earth. So let me just ask these last couple questions. Who needs to hear your story? Who needs to see your scars? This time I want to hand things over to your campus leader so they can close the service.